So the last thing we need to talk about in this lesson is the square root property. And the square root property just says whenever you take the square root of something, then when you take that square root, you have to do plus or minus whatever you get for that square root. Okay? So for example, x squared equals 25. If I would take the square root of each side, the square root of x squared is just x. Okay, hopefully you remember that. Equals plus or minus 25 or plus or minus 5. What this plus or minus means is that there's actually two answers, positive 5 and negative 5. But in math, we sometimes don't like to do anything extra. Okay, some of you can relate to that pretty easily. And we just, instead of writing plus 5 or minus 5, we do this thing called plus or minus. It's just a plus sign with a minus sign underneath. And then you'd say 5. Okay, so it's a little shortcut that we use in math to not do so much writing. But the reason this works is based off of something you all know. If I know x squared is 25, well, what could x be? Thinking, what squared could give me 25? Well, a lot of you say, 5 squared gives me 25. And you'd be absolutely right. But also remember, not only would a positive times a positive give you a positive 25, but we could do negative 5 squared, and that would also give me 25. So when I just say x squared equals 25, we have a mystery. Is it the positive one or is it the negative one? Because they would both look the same at this point. Both of them would give me 25 if I square them. And because we don't know which one we used to get that 25, that's why we say plus or minus. We don't know if they used the positive or the negative to get this term. So looking at this example, we've got y minus 6 all squared equals 81. Okay? This method is best used when you have something equals something else that you can actually take the square root of, and you'll see that in the second part. But this works because I have something squared equal to just a number, so I can take the square root of each side. The square root of anything squared is just itself, so the square root of y minus 6 squared is just y minus 6 equals square root of 81. Well, I know the square root of 81 is 9, but we're going to say plus or minus 9 because we don't know if we had a positive 9 that was squared or a negative 9 that was squared. And now we can get two equations. We're going to have the positive equation, we're going to have the negative equation. So we'd have y minus 6 equals positive 9, and I'm going to have y minus 6 equals negative 9. And then I'm going to solve each of these equations. First one, add 6 to each side, and you get y equals 15. Second one, you add 6 to each side, and you get y equals negative 3. And then you can go back and check your answer. 15 minus 6 would give me 9. 9 squared is 81. Negative 3 minus 6 gives me negative 9. Negative 9 squared also gives me 81. That's why we have these two different answers. Each of these, when I plug them in, would give me a 9 or a negative 9, which would then equal 81. Now looking at the second part, obviously I'm going to take the square root from each side to start. So I get x plus 6 equals, now 12 is not a perfect square, so you just write the square root of 12. Or, and I don't know if you guys have done this yet, factored square roots, okay? Square root of 12, and if this part's confusing you, don't worry about it, okay? This is just something you'll learn eventually. It could be written as the square root of 4 times the square root of 3, so we could say it's the same thing as 2 square root 3, because the square root of 4 is 2, and we can't take the square root of 3. If this confuses you, don't write it down, don't worry about it. If you've already seen it, good, okay, but you don't have to use it for now. And so I get x plus 6 equals plus or minus the square root of 12. Because remember, we could have a positive square root of 12 or a negative square root of 12. Also, don't write this as a decimal because these are irrational numbers. And if you remember, an irrational number never repeats and never ends. So you can never accurately show a square root with a decimal. You'll always be missing something at the end. So then we just get our two equations. We have the positive x plus 6 equals positive square root 12, and then we'd have the negative x plus 6 equals negative square root 12. We'd solve each of these to get our two answers. Subtract 6 from each side. X equals negative 6 plus the square root of 12. Over here, subtract 6 from each side. X equals negative 6 minus the square root of 12. Main idea here is just that you can see that when I take the square root of something, you will always have a plus or minus. And when you're solving an equation, that will lead you to have two separate equations, one accounting for the positive answer, one accounting for the negative answer. And just because I say positive and negative, it doesn't necessarily mean that both numbers will be, that one answer will be positive and the other answer will be negative for the variable. It means what we get for the square root, we're going to have the positive square root and the negative square root. That's what this positive and negative is referring to. Not your final answer, but the root should be positive and negative when you set up your two equations. That's all there is for this section. Go ahead and let me know if you have any questions.